Olivia Brooks never thought her day could get any worse. First, a deranged pigeon swooped down onto her cafe table, knocking over her favorite latte and staining her white dress. Then, at work, her boss scolded her for a typo that didn't even exist. Turned out, it was just an ink smudge on his glasses, but none of that compared to what she was witnessing right now. Across the jewelry store, Olivia froze as she spotted Ryan Walker, her ex-boyfriend, kneeling on one knee, proposing to a woman who looked like she had stepped straight out of a fashion magazine. "No way," Olivia muttered, but her voice barely came out. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears as she stared at the man who once told her that love was a capitalist trap, now kneeling with a diamond in his hand. She felt a tightness in her chest, a mix of shock, humiliation, and something else she didn't want to name. For a brief moment, Olivia felt like the world had caved in, especially when Ryan flashed her that self-satisfied smirk, the kind that screamed, "I moved on first." Sophia, his new fiancée, let out a sugary giggle and lifted her hand, showing off a diamond that sparkled like a miniature star. "Oh, Olivia, you still live here?" Sophia said, her voice laced with fake sweetness. Olivia clenched her fists. She refused to let them see her crumble. And then, before her brain could stop her, she did the craziest thing imaginable. She grabbed a stranger by the collar and kissed him, right in front of Ryan. It wasn't until she pulled away that Olivia got a good look at him, and her stomach dropped. Jawline, expensive suit, the strikingly familiar face she had seen on business magazines. She had just kissed Bryan Carter, the Bryan Carter. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her body was frozen in place. The moment Olivia pulled away, the entire store fell into absolute silence. She didn't dare turn to look at Ryan, but she could feel his shock. Sophia was probably gaping, and everyone else in the store had undoubtedly stopped breathing. But the most unexpected reaction came from the man she had just kissed. Bryan Carter wasn't shocked at all. In fact, he smirked, amused. "Well, that's not a typical greeting, but I won't complain," Bryan said, his voice smooth and teasing. Olivia gawped at him. I didn't." Before she could come up with an excuse, Ryan finally spoke, his tone laced with disbelief. "You're dating Bryan Carter?" Olivia froze. She could admit the truth and run, but when she caught Sophia crossing her arms with a smug expression, Olivia knew she couldn't let them win. So she lifted her chin and grabbed Bryan's hand. "That's right," she said, voice steady. "We're dating." Sophia giggled. "Oh, really? A regular girl like you with a billionaire? I don't buy it." Olivia was ready to snap back, but Bryan squeezed her hand gently, stopping her. He turned to Ryan and Sophia, his expression calm and effortless. "I wasn't expecting our secret to get out so soon," he said. "But yes, Olivia is my girlfriend." Ryan looked like he had just swallowed an ice cube. As they left the store, Olivia was about to slip away, but Bryan caught her wrist. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, clearly entertained. I've caused enough trouble already," Olivia stammered. Bryan tilted his head. "You had the guts to kiss me in front of the entire city, but you're scared of talking to me?" Olivia had no response. Bryan chuckled. "We need to talk. I have a proposal you won't want to refuse." Sitting across from Bryan in an outrageously expensive cafe, Olivia felt completely out of place. "I need a fake girlfriend for a month," Bryan said bluntly. Olivia gaped. "You're serious?" "Very serious. My family is pressuring me to settle down, but I don't like being forced into anything. And you," he tilted his head, "you seem to have your own reasons for playing along." Olivia swallowed hard. He wasn't wrong. "And what do I get out of this?" She crossed her arms. "I'll help you land a better job," Bryan said smoothly. Olivia hesitated, but then she thought about Ryan and Sophia and how Bryan had just saved her in front of them. Finally, she sighed. "Fine, 1 month, but I have my own conditions." Bryan smirked. "I like the way you negotiate." A day after signing the ridiculous agreement, Olivia officially stepped into Bryan Carter's world. and she quickly realized she did not belong here. That became clear the moment she walked into a high-end fashion boutique, where Bryan insisted she pick an outfit for their first public event together. "Don't tell me you're unhappy with my wardrobe." Olivia crossed her arms, glancing down at her unicorn t-shirt and faded jeans. Bryan gave her a look. "I think your unicorn needs a retirement." Olivia gasped, "Hey, this is a symbol of personality, not just a t-shirt." Bryan simply smirked and ushered her inside. 30 minutes later, Olivia stood in front of a mirror, wearing an elegant evening gown, while a hairstylist worked around her like an artist perfecting a masterpiece. "She looks absolutely stunning," a store assistant gushed. Bryan stood with his arms crossed, his gaze satisfied. "I know." Olivia felt her cheeks heat up, but she quickly focused on the task at hand. She needed to prove she could blend into this world effortlessly. That evening, Bryan took her to a lavish gala, a grand ballroom, glittering with chandeliers, guests dressed in couture, sipping champagne, engaged in conversations Olivia couldn't even begin to understand. But the biggest challenge was Bryan's father, Richard Carter. He approached, his sharp eyes scanning Olivia. "So, this is the woman who has captured my son's attention?" Olivia felt an invisible pressure, but she didn't flinch. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Carter." She smiled politely, her gaze unwavering. Richard nodded slowly, but his tone remained cold. "Well, I hope you realize my son isn't easily impressed." Olivia smirked slightly. "Then I guess you're in for a surprise." Beside her, Bryan let out a quiet chuckle. Tonight, Olivia had proven one thing. She wasn't going down without a fight. The gala ended later than Olivia expected. By the time she and Bryan stepped out of the ballroom, she was exhausted. "You did well," Bryan said as they slid into the car. Olivia leaned her head back with a sigh. "Are you saying that just because I didn't spill wine on anyone?" Bryan smirked. "Partly, but mostly because you handled my father better than I expected." Olivia shrugged, but deep down she felt proud. She had stood her ground against a man as intimidating as Richard Carter without breaking a sweat. Over the next few days, Olivia and Bryan spent more time together, not just at high society events, but also in smaller, quieter moments. One evening, they sat on the balcony of Bryan's penthouse, overlooking the city skyline. "Did you ever think you'd end up in a situation this crazy?" Bryan asked, swirling his wine glass. Olivia chuckled. "No, but then again, I never thought I'd kiss a billionaire in front of my ex-boyfriend either." Bryan smirked. "Was it worth it?" Olivia almost said no, but then she glanced at Bryan, the soft glow of the city lights reflecting in his eyes, his expression contemplative yet relaxed. And she realized she liked being around him more than she thought. Maybe. They sat there in silence, but for the first time, it wasn't an awkward one. Things became even clearer when they ran into Ryan at a cafe a few days later. Ryan approached, his eyes scanning Bryan before turning to Olivia. "You're actually dating him?" His voice was full of doubt. Olivia tightened her grip on Bryan's hand and lifted her chin. "Yes, and I've never been happier." Ryan looked completely thrown off. Even Sophia, standing beside him, struggled to keep her fake smile. Bryan gently squeezed Olivia's hand, and in that moment she knew this wasn't just pretend anymore. After running into Ryan, Olivia realized everything had changed. She no longer saw the agreement as just a game. Every time Bryan held her hand in public, it didn't feel like an act anymore. And worse, she started looking forward to those moments. Then, Bryan suggested she move in with him. "It would be more convincing if we lived together," he said over dinner at a high-end restaurant. "The media will stop doubting us, and so will my family." Olivia choked on her drink. "Wait, you want me to move into your place?" "Just for the remainder of the contract," Bryan said, unfazed. Olivia was about to refuse outright, but then she remembered the way Ryan had looked at her with suspicion, remembered how Bryan's father still didn't believe in their relationship. And most importantly, she knew deep down she didn't want to be away from Bryan. So the next day, Olivia dragged her suitcase into Bryan's penthouse. But living with a billionaire was not as easy as it sounded. On the first day, she almost destroyed his ridiculously expensive coffee machine by assuming it worked like a regular one. "You just tried to murder a machine that costs as much as a year's worth of your rent," Bryan teased. Olivia shot him a glare. "Who even spends that much on a coffee maker?" Over the next few days, Bryan discovered that Olivia had a habit of leaving her socks everywhere. "This is not abstract art, Olivia," Bryan frowned, staring at a pair of socks on the coffee table. Olivia shrugged. "You dragged me into your house, now you deal with the consequences." Bryan just shook his head, laughing. Despite their constant bickering, they grew more comfortable with each other, and Olivia knew she was in big trouble. She wasn't just pretending to love Bryan, she actually did. Olivia didn't want to admit that she had fallen for Bryan. She told herself it was just temporary emotions, that she had been too deep into the act for too long. But as the contract neared its end, the weight in her chest grew heavier. Then Bryan asked her a question she wasn't prepared for. "If I asked you to stay, would you?" Olivia froze. She wanted to say yes, but her mind wouldn't let her. She was terrified that if she admitted her feelings, Bryan would realize he never truly loved her, that to him this was still just a contract. So she forced a small smile and lied. "We agreed from the beginning, Bryan, when the contract ends, we go back to our own lives." She hated every word that left her mouth. A part of her screamed to stay, to take the risk, but another part, the part that had been hurt before, told her she was being foolish. What if he didn't feel the same? What if to him this was still just a contract? She couldn't afford to be the only one in love. Bryan's expression darkened slightly, but he didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. "I see." The next day, Olivia packed her bags, her heart sinking. When she left, Bryan didn't stop her. The following days, Olivia tried to go back to her normal life, but nothing felt the same. Her apartment felt empty, her morning coffee tasted bland, and every news article about Bryan made her chest ache. Then, a week later, as she passed by a jewelry store, she spotted the necklace Bryan had given her. And in that moment, she realized the truth. She had made a huge mistake. Without wasting another second, Olivia hailed a taxi straight to Bryan's house. When Bryan opened the door, his eyes filled with surprise. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" Olivia didn't say a word. She stepped forward and kissed him. No more pretending, no more contracts, just the truth. Bryan stood frozen for a second when Olivia kissed him. But then he wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight as if afraid that if he let go, she'd disappear again. When they pulled apart, Olivia met his gaze, no longer hesitant or afraid. "I want to stay," she said, her voice slightly shaky but firm. Bryan studied her, as if trying to commit this moment to memory. Then he smiled, a smile Olivia had never seen before, warm and filled with happiness. "How long did it take you to realize that?" he teased. Olivia laughed, tears shining in her eyes. "Maybe a little too long." Bryan gently took her hand and led her to the couch, but before she could say anything, he got up, left the room, and returned with a small velvet box. Olivia held her breath. He flipped the box open, revealing a shimmering ring. "I wasn't planning to propose like this," Bryan said, his voice low and steady. "But maybe this is the perfect moment." Olivia's eyes widened. "Olivia Brooks, you turned my life upside down in ways I never imagined. But I don't want to go back to how things were. I want you with me. Always. Will you do that with me for the rest of our lives?" Olivia grinned through her tears. "Yes." Bryan slid the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a deep kiss. This time, no contracts, no pretending, just real love. Bryan and Olivia's wedding wasn't just a lavish event. It was a real-life fairy tale. They held their ceremony at a seaside estate, where the golden sunset bathed the ocean in a shimmering glow. Rows of white chairs were lined with delicate roses, and silk drapes fluttered gently in the breeze. Olivia couldn't believe this was her wedding. She stood in front of the mirror, wearing an exquisite gown, its crystal embellishments catching the soft light. When the grand doors opened, Olivia felt her heart race, stepping forward on a petal-strewn aisle, her eyes locked on the man waiting at the end of it. Bryan looked at her as if she was the most beautiful thing in the world. When they exchanged vows, Olivia couldn't stop the happy tears from falling. "I never believed in fate," Bryan said, his voice deep and steady, "until you walked into my life, wrecked all my plans, and made it impossible for me to imagine a world without you." Olivia laughed through her tears. "Then I promise to keep turning your world upside down forever," she said, holding his hands tight. When Bryan kissed her, cheers and applause erupted around them, and this time there was no act, only two hearts becoming one. Married life? They didn't have a perfect life, but they had a happy one. Olivia was still a lovable mess, leaving socks everywhere and eating pizza in bed. Bryan was still the structured, disciplined one, but he had grown to love the colorful chaos Olivia brought into his world. Every morning, she made coffee the old-fashioned way, while Bryan simply shook his head at the expensive espresso machine, collecting dust. "You'll never win this battle," Olivia smirked. Bryan pulled her into his arms, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I don't need to win, as long as I have you." Because in the end, they realized happiness wasn't about perfection. It was about loving each other no matter how chaotic life got. And they did, forever. 3 years later, Bryan and Olivia's lives had changed forever, in the most beautiful and chaotic way. They were no longer just a deeply in loved married couple. They were now parents to two little angels, a pair of mischievous and adorable twins. Their daughter, Luna Carter, was Olivia's perfect mini-me, playful, creative, and always up to some kind of trouble. Their son, Ben Carter, was Bryan's mirror image, calm, observant, but with a heart as warm as the sun. Mornings in the Carter household were never peaceful. "Luna, you cannot color on Ben's face," Olivia gasped, trying to wipe crayon marks off her son's cheek. Luna just shrugged, eyes twinkling. "But you said I should be creative, Mommy." Bryan stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold with a barely hidden smirk. "You do realize you brought this upon yourself, right?" he teased. Olivia shot him a glare. "Oh, don't act innocent. She gets that mischievous brain from you." Ben sat quietly beside them, simply accepting his fate, as if he had long gotten used to Luna's shenanigans. At night, after tucking the twins into bed, Olivia leaned against Bryan's shoulder, exhaling in relief. "We survived another day," she murmured. Bryan tightened his hold on her, pressing a soft kiss to her hair. "And I'll do this with you every day. Forever." Olivia smiled, gazing out the window at the twinkling city lights. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was filled with love and laughter. And for Bryan, Olivia, and their two little angels, this was their happily ever after.